Welcome back, historians. This is Miss V, and we are continuing our series here with Nationalism and Revolution. And here we're going to talk about the rise and rule, and also a little bit about the downfall of Emperor. He became emperor, yes. Napoleon Bonaparte. Alright, so let's get into it. This is still a continuation of the French Revolution, kind of the ending part of the revolution. As we get into Napoleon's rule and reign on France, right? All right, so as this is the summary here, but we're going to, or the standard, and we're focusing on the last part of it as the rise and rule of Napoleon, right? And how he affected France, especially in that rise of his power. And these are your vocabulary words. Consulate is what he established after he overthrew the Directory, and nationalism. We'll talk more about that. Alright, so this is Napoleon Bonaparte. He became commander of the French armies in Italy, and he was quite successful with rising in the ranks because he earned the devotion of his troops and he was able to win their support. So with that, he was able to move up those ranks and really have a command or a leadership of the military for France. And that's kind of how he was able to gain so much power in France. So your question for number one, he decided that instead of striking Britain, he wanted to invade Britain, but he knew that the French would not be able to carry out such a drastic invasion, so he decided to go through Egypt and try to take Egypt, and that way they'll be able to get to India, which was India was once a colony of Britain, okay, and it was a major source of income. So if he figured that if he could break down he can break down India, then Britain would fall, because that was one of the chief, and you will have this vocabulary word too, like the cash crop for Britain, okay? However, the British defeated the French in Egypt, so he was not successful in that particular battle, right? So because of that defeat, Napoleon literally abandoned his army and he left and he returned to France. Yeah, so he left his army high and dry. I can't make this up. Alright, so let's continue. Alright, so as his rise to power, Napoleon took part in this coup d'etat in 1799, as we mentioned before, where he overthrew the Directory and set up a new government called the Consulate. Okay, so no longer is there a Directory, now there's a Consulate. Okay, and Napoleon he made himself the first consul, and as you see here, he started executing things in a more authoritarian way. Authoritarian meaning that he has direct authority, right? Appointed officials, controlled the army, he conducted foreign affairs with other countries, and he influenced the legislature. So he was able to move up the ranks very quickly. And in 1802, he made himself consul for life, right, in this consulate. And then by 2 years later, in 1804, he is crowning himself Emperor of France. He wasn't crowned, he crowned himself Emperor of France. Okay, as you will see here. So that's your number two. He called himself the first consul, and he moved up the rank to be able to call himself an emperor of France. Now, isn't it ironic that the very thing that the French Revolution was fighting against, which was breaking down this monarchy, or breaking down a system where they was trying to establish a republic, now they're back to an emperor again and having a one pony or a one ruler concept here, right? Very interesting indeed. So let's continue. So here you see a picture of his coronation where he is crowning himself, and I believe this is his wife Josephine. right? And this is a picture of him in all his regalia as Emperor of France. Quite distinguished, right? Interesting. All right, so let's continue. All right, so this is 3, 4, and 5. He made peace with the Catholic Church because remember, during the Revolution, France was trying to de-Christianize, right? And de-Christianize that meant taking away all of the aspects of Christianity in France. That was during the Revolution. However, during Napoleon's reign as emperor, he was able to get to this agreement with the Catholic Church, and he made Catholicism the major religion in France again. Okay, so now Catholicism is the main religion, and in return of having this agreement, the Pope said that he would ask for those church lands that was seized during the Revolution. So now the government, or as emperor, he's able to keep all of those lands that was seized during the Revolution. And with this agreement between Napoleon, or the French, him as the French government, and the Catholic Church, they're no longer seen as enemies. Sorry. And as your answer here for number 5, this preserved the relationship between the French government and the Catholic Church, because before it was frayed with what was happening with the Revolution, but now this kind of patched things up between the church and the government itself. Okay, so that's 3, 4, and 5. Alright, so one of the big things that Napoleon did do during his time as emperor was to codify the laws. Okay, and codifying was basically taking all of these laws that was put in place and putting them in sections that's manageable to understand. Okay, so 7 law codes were created, and those law codes were called the civil codes. But those were the most important ones. These were the most important ones, are the Napoleonic codes. Okay, and in the Napoleonic codes, which was one of the most important ones, it stated, and this is your answer for number 7, it stated equality for the citizen before the law. Now, I have this in quotations, and I put this for men because it did not apply to women, nor children, nor enslaved Africans. Again, this is going to come back to be a problem, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Also, the right for the individual to choose a profession. So now he's saying basically that people have the right to choose which, what they want to do as a career, basically, right? And now there's religious toleration, saying that you don't necessarily have to be a Catholic or a Christian. He's open to other religions in France, so they're able to freely practice their religion. And then he abolished serfdom, which was, if you remember what serfdom is, that's feudalism, a part of feudalism and all feudal obligations. So those people, those peasants that were still working under the feudal type system, that was abolished, right? Now, mine, I didn't say slavery was abolished. Under the National Convention, right, it was considered abolished. However, like I said, things are going to change here. Okay, now number 8, as I mentioned before, and the reason why I put it in quotations, and you see here the answer for women and children, and also enslaved Africans, the civil code was a step back, or it didn't even apply at all. Okay, so that was a big problem for women and children, especially in terms of education, equality in the work, for work or professions, etc. Okay, that's 6, 7, and 8. All right, so Napoleon developed this new bureaucracy, and he developed this powerful, strong, centralized administration, right? Because now, instead of before, when King Louis XVI was in power, where his his officials were basically either family or came up by birth or was by, you know, knowing someone. In this case, Napoleon appointed officials that were capable, that they didn't really care about what rank they were or what they were at birth. They didn't gain their employment or as an official by nepotism, right? Nepotism is where, you know, your family. But what he did do, as you see here, public officials and military officers were promoted based on their ability, based on their skill, based on what they did well. Okay, and that really changed the scape or the way things operated in terms of the French government and how it was able to become so powerful as a well-organized administrative government, right? All right, so let's continue. And this was Napoleon's empire, as you see here. He was able to really dominate Europe. As you see here, he dominated France and then he spread outward, right? And a lot of his, even though, as I said, he picked people or officials that were based on skill, a lot of those areas that he was able to conquer was ruled by his family members, okay? Or they were countries that were allies of France, or right? They were ruled by countries that eventually were defeated by Napoleon and then they became allies of France, right? So as you see here, a lot of countries surrounding France was controlled, except for this one right here, and we'll get into that in a minute. That is England. England is going to be his nemesis, and also Russia, but we'll come to that in a minute. All right, so this is 10, 11, and 12. For number 10, he tried to spread some of the principles of the French Revolution. So he did not throw away the baby with the bathwater, right? So he didn't get rid of everything. He did include certain things of the French Revolution, including, as you see here, legal equality, religious toleration, economic freedoms, etc. Right? And it was an important factor to push those ideals and those principles, because it was the development of liberal traditions, as you see here in number 11, for these countries. Now, you know, things are changing, especially they're influenced by the United States of America. So a lot of those principles that the United States of America is adopting, France is kind of under that pressure to make sure that they live up to those standards as well, right? However, as I mentioned, there's two problems that caused Napoleon to fall. One of those was Britain. Great Britain was an island. Great Britain's army was strong. Okay, Great Britain was able to resist Napoleon and his army. And the biggest battle that most historians are those that we know of, Napoleon was defeated in the Battle of Waterloo, okay, against Great Britain. And because of that, and the many wars that Napoleon launched in his career as an emperor, that's what brought Napoleon to his downfall, right? He also launched wars in Russia. He didn't account for how cold Russia is, and when the harsh winters came in, his army was not able to combat those harsh winters, and he lost those wars in Russia. So again, those many wars that Napoleon instigating wars in places like Russia and going against Great Britain, he was not able to combat them, and that gave to his collapses in his empire. And also, as you see here, the rise of nationalism, right? So number 13, as you see here, the British resistance. Napoleon was never able to conquer Great Britain because of its sea power. It made him almost invulnerable. Like I said, the British had a strong naval army. Very strong. Right? He hoped to invade Britain, but his fleet was defeated in Trafalgar Square. Right? And number 13, as you see here, his aim was to defeat Great Britain by trying to stop goods from reaching the European continent. So that was his aim from before. He was trying to stop or trying to surround as much of Great Britain as possible by cutting off their supplies, right? If he could get to India, he could cut off the goods. If he could get around those areas, they could cut off their goods. But he didn't account for how strong Britain's navy is. And a lot of the allied states that were allied with Britain, he didn't account for those states to help, right? And they would not trade with Napoleon because of this. So because of that, that's how Napoleon fell. Okay. And this is number 14, nationalism. He did also not account for nationalism, right? As you see here, one of the most important forces of the 19th century, which is the 1800s, was a sense of nationalism, right? And nationalism is when people have a sense of identity and pride about having a common language or religion or national symbol, just like here in the United States. We'll call that, you know, patriotism, right? Or being patriotic, right? Having that common national symbol of the flag, right? Stuff like that. So in France, that was growing, okay? However, because of that issue, and that kind of grew from the French Revolution, Napoleon's marched armies into countries that were growing with that zeal of nationalism, and that brought him down. And it brought him down in two ways, because the conquered peoples became more united against their hatred against invaders, and those conquered peoples saw their strength and their power in having a nationalistic feel. So with that, they saw their strength, they saw their unity, and now they figured with that they can combat against any outsiders that will come to conquer them, right? And that was the rise, the rule, and fall of Napoleon Bonaparte. So I will see you in the next video.